Welcome to the Software Process and Measurement Cast number 756. I'm Tom Cagley, your host. Today, we welcome back Paul Gibbons. In this visit, we discuss his new book, Change Myths, The Professional's Guide to Separating Sense from Nonsense, which is co-authored with Tricia Kennedy. I've described Paul's book as a Trojan horse. While it dispels myths, it more importantly provides the tools for critical thinking, which will allow you to tackle new myths as they appear. A little bit about Paul. This is his third appearance on the Software Process and Measurement Casts. Links will be in the show notes. Paul is an author, academic, speaker, and business consultant. He has authored numerous books, including Change Myths, which we're talking about this week, and The Science of Successful Organizational Change, which we talked about a few years ago. He lives in the Denver area with his two sons and enjoys playing poker, chess, and other mind sports. Links in the show notes to how to reach Paul and find out about Paul at www.paulgibbons.net. Paul Gibbons, welcome back to the Software Process and Measurement Cast.
I'm like a bad penny. I keep turning it up, right?
This is third time. Actually, last time was 582 back in January of 2019, back before the world changed.
That takes me back. I look upon that as the good old years, right? I don't know about you.
It certainly was a different age. Paul, you've recently written a book called Change Myths, The Professional's Guide to Separating Sense from Nonsense. But you wrote it with a co-author, Tricia Kennedy. So let's start with the easy stuff. This is a third book in the series, isn't it, on change?
Yeah, there's a fourth one in the works too. But it's the third book in a series. And this was a long time in the making. I worked with Tricia, who's a co-author, who's a phenomenal, detail freak. Like almost to the OCD level of a detail freak. God bless her. She'd probably kill me if she listened to this. But she's great because I'm the opposite of that. So I'd be like, whatever, it's good enough. She'd be like, are you joking? So it took a while to get it through the production and everything like that. But, we end up being a very good partnership. So hopefully the final product's good. Did you have a chance to look it over?
As a matter of fact, I actually finished reading the whole thing, about an hour and a half ago.
My gosh.
Yes, okay, I actually have read the whole thing. I'm not going to ask you about the Myers-Briggs, chapter, because that'll just make me crazy. Not my favorite topic in the whole world. Why don't we start with the scientific approach to change is something that I think many of us would love to believe is the right answer. But at the same time, how does going at change from a scientific way and from a humane way, aren't those two things oxymorons? Don't those two things collide?
Well, I want to get to that. The thing I want to say is that although change is the main topic of the Change Myths book, what I'm really interested in is how we separate fact from fiction in the world. And I'm really interested in how we separate fact from fiction in the area of politics, in the area of health and public health. So we talked a little bit about 2019, 2020, vaccinations and maths and miracle bleach cures and parenting advice, nutrition advice, supplement advice. People are always trying to sell you some bullshit these days. And as a consumer and as a parent and as a citizen voter, and then laterally as a change professional, we want to be able to separate fact from fiction. Now, someone might well be listening and say, well, of course, Dr. Gibbons, duh. We want to separate fact from fiction. It's increasingly difficult because of the internet age. And it's always been difficult. But in the days of, let's take the news and politics, when Walter Cronkite said in the 60s and 70s that CBS journalist, maybe most of you listeners would be like, oh, some guy, he used to say at the end of the news, and that's the way it was, January 17th, 1967. And, when he said that, that's the way the world was. No one was like, come on, that's fake news. The mainstream media can't trust those assholes. Nobody said those things so much as today. But so the internet allowed this kind of democratization of content, right? So anybody with a keyboard if you're Alex Jones or if you're PewDiePie and making YouTube videos or whoever, if you're skillful at marketing yourself, you can become an expert and things. And so it's a great thing in the sense that not just old white guys and big, kind of corporate Wall Street institutions turned into content producers. Everybody's a content producer. More over half the people get their news from Facebook. And so we're not just consumers of content, but because we're sharing and liking and sharing on LinkedIn and sharing a public forum, we're also producers of news, what's called the prosumer. So I became very interested in this kind of what's called information disorder. I started writing a book, which is 600 pages long, ought to be 300 pages long. I'm probably never going to say the light of day, called Truth Wars. So that's the thing I'm really interested in. Now, I'm interested in change management because that's something I'm supposed to be expert in. How do you separate fact from fiction in areas like Myers-Briggs and resistance to change and learning styles and denial, anger, bargaining, depression, acceptance? And I think these are interesting areas to explore because a lot of people who I think are really excellent thinkers and really competent people love these things. I mean, when I said I was going to debunk Myers-Briggs, like I had people on my Facebook page, they're like, dude, I love that shit. It was mind changing for me. And you see the Myers-Briggs profile on dating profiles and I think even in LinkedIn profiles, and you see, so that's how deeply ingrained Myers-Briggs is in the collective corporate consciousness. And so how do these ideas become sticky? Because from the get-go, Myers-Briggs, the psychologists used to go, oh, God, Myers-Briggs in the 60s and 70s, oh, what a load of rubbish.
They
right?
still
but
do.
Nevertheless, 95% of the Fortune 500, and if you dare to criticize it. So anyway, so how do these ideas propagate when they're clearly false? And then the main reason of the book is also like, how do you have reasons? So say you think denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and acceptance is bullshit. Like that doesn't apply generally always to change, right? I think most people would arrive at that. What are our reasons? Like who is Elizabeth Kubler-Ross? And, how do you begin to parse fact from fiction in something that's, it's on Seinfeld and it's on The Simpsons and, you hear DABDA all the time. Like, how does that become sticky? So that's the big project, is doing that. And so the subject matter is change and some of the theories about change management that grew up in the 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, and why are they so sticky today when, again, quite a lot of people think they're garbage. Myers-Briggs has been debunked by a guy, very famous guy, Adam Grant, Morton. A couple of my other friends have written really funny and entertaining debunks of it. Why is it sticker? Why is it there? Is it a zombie idea? Anyway, so that's the book. So that's what I'm passionate about, is how we make better decisions. And even though I would like to be the guy for the change world, hundreds of thousands of people who are change experts, who is like the Supreme Court, as I say in the book, I would like to be the Supreme Court of change ideas and say, this is rubbish, this is accurate, and this is not, and this is it. That's not who I want to be in the book. I mean, I have strong opinions, but it's more like, how do I give people the tools to reason for themselves in the debate so we don't have people shouting past each other? Like, I love Myers-Briggs. Well, I think Myers-Briggs sucks. Like, so we have reasons for believing what we believe. And I think that's the most important thing, is we have reasons for our beliefs. And people can place their chips where they may. If people read the book and they think, what? Gibbons said some good things, but, I think Myers-Briggs is a winner and I think it helps us do X, Y, Z. And who am I to argue, right? But as long as they have reasons and they've thought through the arguments before and against. That's very long-winded, but that's the project of the book, is like helping people be better critical thinkers in their lives as parents and as citizens and as consumers of health products and exercise regimes and fad diets and masks and vaccinations and climate change. Like, how do we begin to parse with the noisy world we live in, like separate fact from fiction? Anyway, that's my thing. I sound like a zealot, but anyway.
And it is an important thing to be a zealot about. And as we all know, it's all about popularity. If you're popular, you must be an expert. Therefore, what you're talking about must be true.
That's right.
And once we've established that, then we have a model. And
That's right.
It's all about model.
Popularity is a proxy for expertise.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
One of the tools that you laid out was nicely put, liar, which it made me smile when I first ran into it. And it's like, what is this? What is this? And
yeah.
so why don't you walk us through that as a tool to focus that conversation?
I will. I will, and maybe we'll use an example. So, how do you know what you know? Is the liar tries to give you an answer to that? How do you know what you know? And it's an acronym for logic, intuition, authority, and research. How do you know what you know? And if you know something, if you say you know something, this comes from philosophy. Bore the ass of most of your listeners. But anyway, you either know it for four reasons. One is kind of logical and makes sense, like you deduce it from things that you definitely know. Secondly, some authority figure, maybe social media, or maybe some famous guy, John Cotter or Adam Grant or whatever, Brene Brown, whatever, knows it. So an authority figure. The other one is intuition. So this thing, I know this thing, but I can't really think, but my intuition tells me this is pretty true, which is very valuable for change practitioners when you're in an organization and you can kind of sniff stuff out that you don't really have facts or reasons for, but it seems to right based on your experience, your pattern recognition, your what Daniel Kahneman calls system one thinking. And then there's research evidence. So there's four things: your logic, intuition, authority, and research. So those are four sort of quote unquote sources of knowledge. And those things frequently conflict. So the world would be a simpler place if those always lined up, but they don't. Sometimes our gut tells us something's true, but if you look at the research, it turns out to be rubbish. Sometimes our gut tells us something's true, and an authority figure says, well, actually, no, that's not the way the world works. Sometimes, and so these things, and this is what you get to be as a human being. One of the great, freedom of conscious things is like, you can be conscious about, why do I think this is true? What's is it my intuition? Is it logic? So to take an example, something like learning styles, right? So learning styles, people love learning styles.
Almost as much as Myers-Briggs.
Or as much as Myers-Briggs. So learning styles is really interesting because it's intuitively true, for sure, that we all have preferences. It's trivially true that some people prefer auditory, some people prefer kinesthetic, some people prefer whatever the various, visuals, some people prefer VARK as one of the initial visual, auditory, kinesthetic. And is R reading? I guess R is reading. There's so many of these. Anyway, so it's trivially true we have preferences, but what you'd want with something like learning styles is if you're thinking about tailoring content for some work you're doing in organizational change, is learning styles a guide to how you ought to tailor either training content or communication content? And for that to be true, people would have to learn better and faster using their preferences. So if I say I'm an auditory learner, that's okay. I'll take your word for it. Do I learn faster? Well, that's something you can test with science, whether I learn faster. And so what you can do is you can do an experiment, and people have their preferences, and they say, they fill out some learning styles questionnaire, and you get their preferences, and then you study the speed at which they retain information, how quickly and well they learn. And it turns out this thing, which is called the matching hypothesis, if you match content to their preference, is false. Now that's horrifying to some people. We're like, hey, I like videos. Of course I learn better at videos. Well, no, you don't. Well, at least, you, on average, if you look at a big enough population, people don't. So there's two things. How do you go from the trivial intuitive truth? This is liar coming into, it makes sense. I'm a visual learner. I should obviously learn better if I get visual content, to using research to parse that and saying, well, actually, you don't. So those are the I and the R of it. And then there's authority. Learning styles is a monster industry. It's not quite as big as Myers-Briggs, right? But, we're talking about huge. First of all, there's dozens of them. And one of the things that the critical thinker would say, well, hang on a minute. If there are dozens and dozens of learning style frameworks, how do I know, are they all right? Are none of them right? You have to be curious about that, right? As a critical thinker, you have to think, well, why are there so many? Surely if this was a template for the way humans learn, then, you'd expect them to be able to distill it down to VARK to be, mostly right. But instead, you'll find that there are ones that are completely different, use completely different words and language and everything like that. So, and then the other thing, and then there's logic. And logic's a really fascinating thing. So I was talking to this dude who sadly left us last year, who was a professor at, I think, Emory University. And he was talking about learning styles on my podcast. And he said, if you have a young soccer player who's really good with their right foot, and you can compare this to a learning style analogy, right? Really good with their right foot, really, really super talented and everything like that. They really prefer their right foot. Okay, it's normal enough things. Are you serving that guy by delivering him learning content for his right foot? And the answer is absolutely not. Because to be any good at soccer, you have to be able to use both more or less equally, kind of like, sort of the thing. And so that's the learning style question. Is it in the interests of the learner? We know now it's not true that matching it is thing, but is it in their interests anyway? And the answer is, in today's world, you have to be a multimodal learner. You have to be able to take the nectar of learning, whether it be from books or from audio, or from podcasts or from visuals or from whatever, or from conferences. You have to be a multimodal learner. You don't have the luxury of just saying, my kids would love it, right? My kids don't read. I mean, I had a kid, my kid used to devour a book a week when he was 10, and now it's like a book a year. He's just decided that reading isn't for him, which breaks my heart as a book junkie.
Yeah,
but anyway, so that's learning styles. And so you can parse, the logic of it. And then again, it gives us a chance to double check our answers. So that's the learning style shtick, basically, is basically a rubbish idea. Now, what are the alternatives to it? Well, one of the things that's an alternative to it is you match the learning content delivery to what you're trying to learn. So, for example, if you're learning to play the piano, you can spend a lot of time reading, learning how to read music. But the more time you spend with your fingers touching the keys, the better it will be for you. If you're skating, every now and then you have to lace up the skates. So from a learner's point of view, it's important to have this kind of multimodal approach to learning, and how you learn should be tailored, surprise, surprise, to what you're trying to learn, and not just to your preference. And then there's the funny aspect of it. There's a very funny satirical newspaper called The Onion, who has an outraged parent saying, the school system is unfair. My child's a nasal learner, and how should they be expected to learn in the classroom where people are expected to read and experiment and work with their hands and everything like that? We need to give voice to the nasal learners among us, and it's satire. But that's one of the attractive things is about learning styles, is that we don't learn better than, there are no smarter learner, but things that actually we just have preferences. And that's a lovely idea. It's just, sadly, it's not true. There are people that learn faster, better. There are people who are smarter than other people,
Yeah, there
it's
are.
just the natural diversity of things. But it's an attractive idea for a parent, to say, my kid just doesn't, take in content well in the classroom because, it's all, well, they're just as smart as the other kids. Well, maybe they're not, it's an attractive idea that all of us are equally smart, with other ones we're just different. And it's kind of not true. I mean, we're different, obviously.
There is a distribution.
And definitely, I suck at things and I'm good at other things or something like that. But, anyway, that's the shtick. So I just wonder how that will go down with your listeners. That's the thing. We lost them all?
Well, I don't think we'll lose them all. I think they may, buy your books and, ban them then. But, at least they'll buy them first.
As long as they don't burn crosses on my lawn or something.
No, I don't think they're that kind. Now, it's I love The Onion, but the whole idea of a nasal learner just sort of sheds light on the idea that there are models for everything. So there, did you check to make sure there wasn't a model that included nasal learning?
Yeah. Well, it's funny that there are dozens and dozens of these things. And same with personality assessments, by the way. I won't launch into the Myers-Briggs thing, but, there are many, many, many different personality inventars. I personally prefer what Game of Thrones character are you? I think that's the one that's got the most use. It's certainly the most fun.
That means I have to go off and read George R. R. Martin.
No, you have to watch the television show. The television show is
I'm a book junkie. I'd have to read the book first.
George R. R. Martin, I bought the books because I kind of like the show as well. The books are hard going. I mean, he's a very, one of the things that makes writing great sometimes attention to detail, and George R. R. Martin is a detail freak. And so these pages and pages and pages of descriptive passages. But he's brilliant. But that wasn't for me.
Well, maybe he'll get done with the series.
All right, which Star Trek character are you? Those another personality inventory.
Understood.
There you go.
Here's the problem, right? We go down this Liar, and I really did like Liar. And there were a couple of the actual tables, the 10 questions at the end. Yeah. That I could see that would be really great. You could actually walk people through some of those and get them to actually think through whether or not the things that are coming out of their mouth or things they've decided to believe are at least rational. But there are just most of us don't go out and sort of like kill and then eat things. We take information from lots of other people. What we know is a reflection of what somebody else knows or somebody else discovers. How can we go down that path of thinking through whether or not this is logical if we've gone down the path of actually accepting that, Paul knows change management. I'll read Paul, and what Paul says is the right answer.
Well, yes, I don't really want that. Much as I'd like to be like that guy. Hey, let's go talk to the Oracle, like from the Matrix movies. Let's go talk to the Oracle, right? The all-knowing, all-seeing guys. Yeah, I would love that. But I mean, I would be a better service to the world if I just provide people the tools to think for themselves. And once people have read the book, they'll have the arguments for and against. So, and that's really what I want. So you'll be armed. If you turn out that you're a fan of denial, anger, bargaining, depression, acceptance, you'll have reasons for and against it. And if you decide that that's what you want to believe, that's your right as a human being. If you think, despite what I said, that it's useful and it provides value to your clients, have at it, right? But you should know the facts. And I will arm you with the facts around things like denial, anger, bargaining, depression, acceptance, which, by the way, is as popular. I mean, all of these things are super popular. So that one is like legendarily popular.
Absolutely. I probably have it tattooed somewhere on me.
Yeah. She was a giant, Elizabeth Kubler-Ross in the 1960s. And it was the first model I learned on my day one of like how to be a change management person. This is in the dark ages of the 1990s, early 1990s. And it was the first model. It's like, this is what happens when people go through change. I was like, oh, wow, okay, that's interesting. And I kind of sort of fell for it, hook, line, and sinker, right? There was some guy or woman, I can't recall, 30 some years ago, teaching this course, and they were an authority figure, and they said that this is what happens when people go through change. And it makes, again, using Liar, it makes intuitive sense. It's like, oh yeah, that makes sense to me. Like I remember denial, or I remember anger, or I remember bargaining. So on one level, on an intuitive level, things like that make enormous sense. But we need to do better than just like look at the surface, right?
Well, and as I think that's the first change myth in the book, if I remember correctly. And you go through the process of, well, this is what a dying person goes through, not necessarily a person who's grieving for the dying person.
That's right.
Let alone the person that's trying to talk about organizational change. And
that's right. New SAP system.
Yeah. They're just abstractions after abstractions. The problem then becomes, obviously, right? So if we go and challenge that, then all of the other models that build on those, and those are legion too.
The question is, with denial, anger, bargaining, depression, acceptance, is one, is it true? And if you ask grief experts today, they would say, no, it's rubbish. That the experience of grieving is deeply individualized. And that those 5 emotions don't begin to cover the territory, which might be confusion, might be relief. There's all sorts of different, words we can use to use the emotional experience of it. And so grief experts have said, well, it wasn't ever really true in the first place, despite the fact that she was a genius of a woman. Elizabeth Kubler-Ross. And then there's the question, if it's not true for the grieving, why would it be true for organizational change? Like, then you've got another leap to say, even if it were true, and today's grief episodes were full of baloney, or something like that, it still applies to organizational change. And then people would argue that it helps them empathize. And I would just say to that, does it? How do you know? Because is real empathy like having a template for what someone's experience would look like and trying to say, oh, they're in denial, or it seems we're going through the bargaining phase? Or is empathy the sort of deep listening that, tries to get at, at some deep level what someone's saying without having a template of what they ought to be going through? And so I'm not sure. There are people who claim that it helps them empathize with the clients. How do you know? The fact that you want to empathize with the client, you're already a long ways down the road. And how much does having DABDA help you? I would say not very much. Anyway, so there's facts and the history of it and yada, 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 and all of that. And then there's the idea that there's a curve and that our experience and learning and change goes through a dip. And then we come out the bottom of the dip. And that's an attractive idea if you feel shit, right? I mean, if you have lost someone, for example, and you're in the, terribly difficult grieving process, it's attractive to know that one day that there will be relief and that we'll stop grieving and that there'll be this thing called acceptance and we'll come to a sense of peace. That's not always the way that learning and change happens, though. Sometimes we get really, really enthusiastic about something and we learn really, really fast and really, really well and something like that. And then we plateau. Like if you think about weight loss as a change, there are many people who go on these diets and they lose that first 10 pounds in the first 3 weeks and they're like, this is it. And then they plateau and then they lose motivation. And then, before they know it, they're back on the strawberry shortcake. That's a typical thing where there's a hump. There's the other way. Like you're super, super excited and a lot of progress really, really fast. And then it falls off. And then there are also plateaus. There are plateaus in human performance where you learn really, really fast and you change really, really fast. And then it goes flat for a long, long, long time. So there are lots of different ways. There are fad cycles where, you have an S curve and then it's flat and then there's another S curve. And so there are lots of different ways that people, so we want these kind of tidy templates for human beings. There's a noble purpose. It's like we want to understand what makes people tick, but we want these simple templated answers when actually the truth may be a little more complex than that. Sad to say. So anyway,
might be a little bit more complex.
Might be. Yeah. Well, I'm trying to, that's the British in me, like understatement.
So the world is significantly more complex and we're trying to fit simplifications models. And we could trot out the George Box, quote about models. But the reality is, I think that's what's easier to sell. And as someone who sometimes has to sell himself, in public, maybe I will edit that part out. But, the whole idea of selling sometimes...
Is that you on street corners?
Yeah, there you go again. Probably downtown on Euclid Avenue.
Change advice, like Lucy in the Peanuts cartoon. The change expert is in 10 cents.
Yeah, down at the corner, Yeah.
Holding this, twirling the sign. Yeah.
It's easy with, the 140 or 240 or whatever we can use on Twitter now, the short pieces to grab people's attention. It's easier to use these massive abstractions than it is to say it depends. And I think it almost always depends on a lot of other things.
Sure. But it sounds like you're being evasive.
Yeah, it depends.
It does depend. That's the truth of the matter. And yes, it sounds like I'm being evasive, but I'm not being evasive. It depends. Well, there you go.
Why is that so hard to communicate? Why is it so
we don't
hard
like nuance. It goes back to the science of org change. If you remember that, There's this guy called Philip Tetlock. He used the metaphor of hedgehogs and foxes. Hedgehogs are like one-trick ponies, and they're very sure of what they say. And there are a lot of great examples in politics and great CEOs and people who are super well known for being like really dogmatic and sure of themselves. There's no nuance. There's no ambiguity. There's no changing of mind. This is the way the world is and this is what we should do. And, you're with us or you're for us or against us, as they say. And that's the hedgehoggy style. The foxes are more nuanced, and on the one hand, on the other hand, and there's that old saying from John Maynard Keynes: "When the facts change, sir, I change my mind. What do you do?" And people like that who speak in nuance and ambiguity and complexity. First of all, there's a word for them in politics. They're called flip-floppers, right? And that's not a word that's a term of admiration. We want a world that's simpler than it is. We want descriptions of the world that's simpler than the world is. And so we elect hedgehog-type peoples, whereas, in fact, we need more foxes. We need more people. And then Harry Truman, the U.S. president, said, "Well, someone find me a goddamn one-handed economist." And what Harry Truman meant was he was sick of his advisors saying, "Well, on the one hand, Harry, but on the other hand, Harry," and he's like, no, I don't want that horseshit. I want to know like what I should do, bro. And well, he probably didn't say bro. That's more of a 21st century thing. Yeah. But anyway, Harry
but he would have
Truman famously wanted a one-handed economist. He's a funny character. I wish I could have met a guy like Harry Truman. He sounds like he's quite a critter.
Well, we have not invented the time machine. At least I've not observed someone that could have come back in time. As of this point, the whole idea of change myths and the approach that you and Tricia took on this book, why did you go down the path of debunking the myths? So is it just a platform for teaching people to think, or were you actually also targeting the myths themselves?
Yes, and yeah, both. Both, I think that having read it, like people who read Thinking Fast and Slow, for some people that's a life-changing book. How we think about what we think, that's a really useful thing. So yes, I'd like the change profession to have the tools like Liar. There are other tools in the book, but that's the sort of big one. But I think it's important also in our politics and as a parent and, with the deluge of information that attacks us every day from a variety of sources, to know what to trust, to know where to place your chips, your epistemic chips. Yeah. So that's that. But then also, like from a change management thing, if you build a profession on bullshit ideas, I'm skeptical about your ideas, your ability to create new knowledge for the future if it's built on shaky foundations. So, for example, one of the things that clients use that horrifies me is this thing called ADKAR, which was from 1988, Jeff Hyatt's book in 1988. Well, the guy made a contribution to the field. He wrote that book in 1988. Like back in those days, people don't know shit about change. And, he advanced some ideas, some of which have stood the test of time, not the test of validity, but the test of time. So, you got to start somewhere. But there comes a time where you have to set aside your the false beliefs and childish beliefs or whatever they are. Like with Ptolemaic astronomy, like we can navigate this model that the Earth is at the center of the universe and the sun and the planets and the moons and the satellites and all that revolved around the Earth. Well, that was very useful for a long, long time because it enables you to navigate by the stars. It was kind of, an enabled celestial navigation. That's no small thing. But when you start to the model got more and more inaccuracies. And what they tried to do with the Ptolemaic model, their geocentric model, was they added more and more and more and more complexities and kludges and fudges and things to it. And eventually it became very cumbersome and it collapsed under its own weight. And then this guy called Copernicus says, well, actually, it's probably because the sun's at the center. And they're like, what, dude? Do you want to be burned at the stake, yo? But it actually took almost a century after Copernicus wrote the book De Celestiis, or something, I can't remember, some Latin word, the orbits of the celestial bodies. It was almost 100 years before the facts were to reject Ptolemaic astronomy and Copernican astronomy became the thing. And then, what's the benefit of that? Well, little things like GPS and being able to put things in orbit and all of this kind of stuff. Like if you want a thing and explaining the universe, like galaxies, are the galaxies revolving around the Earth too? Well, no, and so our knowledge of cosmology would never have progressed very far beyond the 15th century had we stuck to this old thing. But it took a century from the time that Copernicus wrote his book, almost a century, 80 years, before it was, wholly discarded. And there are still people, right? If you ever get this thing called Quora, there's still flat earth people. I still see bullshit. I get it in my inbox, right? if the earth was round, then wouldn't shit fall off the bottom of it? And, like some guy patiently, much more patiently than me, goes through an explanation of it. I'm like, dude, you're a saint. Because I could not answer that question without being a little bit rude. I'm afraid, how come, if people landed on the moon, how come, there's no whatever, there are people who have patience for that, and there are people who don't. And I'm sadly in the latter category.
I'm in that latter category too. But as the idea of putting these frameworks down, exposing. By the way, I had a change management professional beat me up over ADKAR earlier this week. It was amusing.
What you were the pro? You were the against, and they were the pro?
I was like, no, let's not go this way. And no, it was like, it's the only way. You are not a professional if you do not believe in this. So, but
again, it's complexity theory, like lock-in. Like, why do we have QWERTY keyboards? Like, it's not a very efficient way of organizing the keys. You would want the more common letters to be near the center, and the really uncommon letters to be the outside. Well, that's not the way a keyboard's organized, sadly enough. But lock-in, and with Myers-Briggs, and with ADKAR, and with denial, anger, bargaining, depression, acceptance, and with learning styles, there's considerable lock-in effects, and like the QWERTY keyboard. But the question is can we grow the profession of change when we rely on stuff like ADKAR? And, for people who are interested, there's 2 or 3 pages on ADKAR in the book. It's not one of the sort of 8 myths we call out, but in the sort of sidebar, we say, well, we take it to task. Again, it's about having reasons. If you want to know the arguments one way or another, and then you decide that ADKAR is a useful thing for you to use, then have at it, man. You're a free human being, but you should know the arguments against it. There's a saying from, it was a politician. It was Oscar Wilde, or was it John Stuart Mill, or one of those guys, said, if you only know one side of an argument, if you only know your own side of the argument, you don't know that very well, right? If you only know the facts to justify your own belief, and you don't know why the other side think what they do, then you don't understand your own position very well. And that's a good point. So you can be an ADKAR fan if you choose to be an ADKAR fan, but you should know why some people think it's rubbish. You can be a Myers-Briggs fan, but you should know why some people think it's rubbish. And once you're armed with that, then believe what you like, right? And use what you like. So anyway, that's the project. I'm glad you brought up ADKAR.
It was top of mind, especially, the scary part was I had not read that part of the book yet, and I had already had that discussion. It's like, oh my, it's always fun to run into it's things like, maybe it happened just because I bought the book.
Well, I rely on intuition too, as well, when we're debunking ADKAR, because we say, okay, let's take some change that you went through, right? Or some change that you haven't gone through. Say you're trying to lose weight. Is it because you're not aware? No, I'm aware I need to lose weight. Is it because I don't desire? No, I really do like to lose weight. I don't have enough knowledge. Well, I do have enough knowledge. I know that I have to exercise more and eat less, right? Whatever nuance of that. So is it any of those things? No. So if it's not the answer to, trivially, a weight loss problem in an individual, then what is it the answer to? And do people lose weight who've never heard of ADKAR? Well, yes, they do. I'd never heard of ADKAR, by the way, before I moved to America in 2008 from England. And by 2008, I'd been a changed person for 25 years, right? I'd never heard of ADKAR, right? And I'd been, that'd been my livelihood, right, for 25 years. And then I moved to the United States, and there's this thing called ProSci, and there's this thing called ADKAR. So I ran across it for the first time, like in 2010. And I was like, what is this? And then I found that, people on their LinkedIn profiles have ProSci certifications and ADKAR certifications and whatever, and all that kind of stuff. I was like, well, I had to acquaint myself with what it was. But I'd been successful as a change person for decades before I learned what it was. So is it necessary for organizational change? No. Does it explain, using your intuition, like your ability to make changes in your own life or changes in your kids' life? Say you want your kids to do the homework. Well, is it awareness? Is it desire? Is it knowledge? I don't know. Which of those ADKAR things will help your kid sit down and apply their backside to the seat of their chair? Well, does that car get you there? I would bet that it doesn't.
having well, it's been a long time since I've had to go through that kind of
yes, I know your kids are your kids have one of your kids has a PhD, right? I mean, in neuroscience. Yeah, they're out of the nest, way out of the nest.
Way out of the nest.
Oh, well, I'm 63 years old and I have a 13-year-old, so mine are really a long ways from out of the nest. I'll be paying college fees until I'm my late 70s probably.
I am glad I did all that stuff early.
Yeah, well, life is what it is, right? Yeah, I have had kids. Yeah, it always is.
That's why
right?
there is no one size fits all model for everything, and Paul. Before we wrap, the whole idea of change myths, it's really a great communication vehicle. How do we take that communication and actually use it to change behavior?
Yeah, well, I mean, that's the thing, right? And I want our community to begin to have these debates. As I said, I would love to be the guy who says what's true or false in the world, and everybody listens and supplicates himself at my feet. That's never going to happen. But I want people to be armed with the sort of facts for and against, and they make up their own minds. And so that's the kind of vision for the book, and that applies also to miracle bleach cures and to vaccination and to whatever domain, political speech, corporate misinformation. You and I haven't talked about this before, but the tobacco wars. I mean, this is something that fascinated me in my other book. So the Surgeon General in 1963 says tobacco use, as certain as we can be from science, uncontroversially contributes to heart disease and cancer. Uncontroversially, like there's no doubt. And that was in 1963. But by 1980, smoking was still killing several million people a year, and it still kills 1 million people a year. So despite the fact that we're now almost 70 years, 60, how many years is that? 60 years ago since the United States Surgeon General said tobacco use is harmful to health, seriously harmful, cancer and heart disease, right? Those are the two numbers.
Those are biggies.
I mean, number one and number two, or number two and number three, I can't remember. And the list of things that kill people. And still, you still find it in the grocery stores. You still find it in gas stations. How is that possible?
Heck, you find pharmacies that sell cigarettes.
Yeah, it's not. It's nuts if you think about it. And if you think about if there was a product on the shelf of a grocery store in the orange juice section or in the dairy section that caused even 10 deaths, 10, right? Some 10 people died in Cleveland because they consumed X product. How long would that product be in the shelves? A nanosecond, it would be off the shelves. Right? But here we have something that causes 1 million deaths a year. It's still there. And again, that's the stickiness that we have, how long it takes to overturn the consensus belief on something. You look at the opioid addiction, you can look at various things like why do things become as sticky as they come? So anyway, that's the project of the book. That's what you asked me about, like how you reconcile science with this very human thing. It's like, I'd like us to use the science of human, we know a lot more about human behavior than we did 50 years ago, and we know a lot more than we did 25 years ago, and we know a lot more than we did 5 years ago. And so I would like what we do in change to make use of the best science and not necessarily the science that we're comfortable with. Like when people say, I'm comfortable with denial, anger, bargaining, and depression acceptance, I want to slap them and say, so what? I don't care that you're comfortable with it. That's nice for you, but is it useful to your clients? And is it true? And if neither of those last two is true, the fact that you're comfortable about it is completely irrelevant. So that's the project. We don't want to use stuff that we're just comfortable with. We don't like having our deep beliefs challenged. I remember, like, I tell you this story in the book too. Like, you're at a dinner party and like there's a guy, one of the parents next to you. Like, back 20 years ago when your kids were young, they're 6 years old and they were 8 years old, and you're at some lawn barbecue with people and all the kids are running around and all the grown-ups are sitting there talking to one another. And one of the grown-ups says, hey, look at those kids, how hyper they are. They've just had sugar, all that sugar. If you're the guy who says, well, actually, there's no relationship between glucose consumption and hyperactivity in children, they'll look at you like, who is this asshole? Fact of the matter is, there's no correlation between glucose consumption and hyperactivity in children. You can measure that stuff. You can give some kids glucose and some kids the placebo, and you can measure their level of activity. And, if the glucose getting kids aren't more hyperactive, then it's a false belief. But no one wants to be that asshole, right? No one wants to be the guy. No one wants to be the guy who says, hang on a minute, the evidence doesn't show that. I have it. And my ex-wife believes in homeopathy and all kinds of funky things. And I'd say, well, there's no evidence. And she's like, leave me alone. Get out of my face.
I've had both of those conversations.
Yeah.
And I had the donut conversation, which is which is all about the sugar.
The astrology conversation. The astrology conversation. People swear by astrology.
Of course. I'm a Libra. No, I'm not a Libra.
Well, there's Arthur C. Clarke, the famous science fiction writer, said, I don't believe in astrology. I'm a Sagittarius. We're skeptical.
Well, that'll be my.
That's some good stuff. That's some good stuff. But anyway, that's what I'm trying to do. I hope people find it valuable. Again, it's about having reasons for why you think the way you think about the world of change. Resistance to change is another one we go through. That's one of the myths in the book. Again, I'll leave the reader to parse what we say. Every book on change management has a chapter on resistance. And it's, again, one of these things where academics go, actually, that's not the right way to look at things. But the profession largely ignores that and says, well, of course, that's what they're doing is they're resisting. Well, okay. Yeah.
Not enough communication.
I'll leave your readers to parse that stuff.
I do think, again, this is a book that's very rich in terms of from a person in the business. There are a lot of things that one can take away from this. It gives you a lot of ideas in terms of how to think through things rather than just accept things on face value. And I think that if nothing else, the quotes between chapters and sections, heck, that's worth the price of the book in its own right.
The quotes.
I love the quotes.
The quotes are very good. Yeah, they're smarter people than me. Yeah, the quotes are superb. Yeah.
Paul, this has been absolutely marvelous.
Yeah, it's been always super to talk to you. I hope your listeners get a lot of value. I do want to, by the way, say that I'm writing another one because people rightly say, hey, man, it's easier to tear stuff down than it is to build it up. Like, you spend all your time like debunking and you're that guy. Like, we don't need that guy. We need someone to provide us with new knowledge and new insights and better knowledge. What is better than this stuff that you wish us to discard? And so the next book's called The Future of Change Management, and it's going to be 10 contributed chapters from around the world, from experts around the world. And they're going to be topics that are really at the periphery of change management. The question I ask is, ought they to be at the periphery? So diversity and inclusion, ChatGPT in change management, gamification in change management, behavioral science in change management, neuroscience in change management, things that aren't fully inside the body of change knowledge. What do they call it? CMBOK, change management body of knowledge. Not fully inside that. And so the future of change management will include 10 different chapters that give different perspectives on ought we to be thinking about inclusion in change management. Because it's trivially true that policies in organizations affect men and women differently. A great example is remote working, by the way. Non-white people and women much prefer it over more traditional workers that look like you and me. And so why is that the case? Ought we to be thinking about our stakeholders in change management, not just in terms of where they work, which function they work in, or the IT department like this, and customer service likes this, and marketing likes this, and all of that, which is the way we normally carve up the world of organizations into stakeholders. But ought we to be thinking about diversity issues? I don't have an answer to it. I mean, it's legitimate. It's not a rhetorical question. It's a question of, but we're going to have a chapter on inclusion in change management. So I'm just very excited about that book. I mean, that book's going to start to offer, I think, the change world some really new ideas, which they can accept or reject, because they're human beings and they get to believe what they like to believe. But some of those topics, neuroscience, behavioral science, gamification, ChatGPT, inclusion in change management, neurodiversity and change management is another one. So those are some of the topics from the new book. And that book will be out later this year.
I was about to say, when is it coming?
I don't know. I'm not writing it myself. I'm getting chapters from people from around the world, which is in some sense easier for me, but I have to be that guy. And that guy is like, hey, you said you'd finish a chapter by the end of April. How you doing? And they're like, oh man, leave me alone, man. I've been so busy with work. So I'm hopeful by the end of the year, but my experience tells me maybe not as fast as that.
It'll happen. It'll happen. That sounds fun. I'm looking forward to
that'll be a goodie. And I won't be Mr. Negative anymore, Mr. Debunker. I'll be Mr. Positive.
How can people reach out, find Paul, say, hey, I need help? How would they go about finding Paul?
Well, I'm back on the speaking thing. Like, I left IBM 2 weeks ago now. So I'm back kind of on the speaking circuit. So one of the ways I'm going to be earning a crust is giving keynote speeches around the place. So Paul at paulgibbons.net is one. And then grab a copy of the book and, have at it. Review it on Amazon or trash it on LinkedIn or whatever. They say no publicity is bad publicity. I think that was Marshall McLuhan. There's no such thing as bad publicity. So I hope it stirs up a little bit of controversy. It's always good to talk to you.
Fantastic.
You're my Cleveland brother in arms here.
Absolutely. Well, hopefully the listeners will go out, buy a copy, and maybe we'll do it on Reread Saturday before we roll that one up.
Yeah, maybe I'll be on Oprah. Who knows? That's not likely.
Didn't she shut down? Is Oprah still around?
I don't know. It shows how in touch I am with things.
My wife and I do a quiz every week from the New York Times, on the current week's, and the thing that we invariably get one wrong, and it's always pop culture. We just stink at pop culture.
I still use references like Martha Stewart and Oprah. The younger generation. My young 13-year-old, I have no idea who Oprah is. I don't think. Maybe he does, but
don't ever use Opie from Mayberry in a class. That's death, man.
Mayberry RFD. That was the 50s. Yeah, now you're really.
Reruns. That was back when I had a TV.
Now you're really dating yourself.
Yeah.
Anyway,
all right.
It's good to be here. Let's wrap it up, and perhaps once we wrapped up, you and I can spend 5 minutes.
All right, Paul. So I want to thank you for being on the cast. If you did have a magic wand and 2 wishes that would change management, what would they be?
Well, that's one reason, is that we begin to think critically about what we use. So that's my magic wand, is that when people are using something, Myers-Briggs, some pet tool that they use, change readiness tool or something like that, they have the tools to think through whether it's true or useful. So that's one thing. And the second thing is, I think in the world at large, my magic wand would be that we, in a democracy, we should be able to have reasoned debates with one another about what's true and false. And we can't now, because we have these people talking past each other, yelling past each other. So my bigger ambition is that critical thinking become part of what we learn in schools and what we as adults use day in and day out to decide on what we believe. So that's my magic wand.
And that would be a wonderful magic wand. Paul, anything else that you'd like to promote before we break?
No, Paul at paulgibbons.net. Hit me up, as the children say these days. And good to talk to you, buddy.
Cheers. Our interview with Paul was huge. So no Reread Saturday news this week. We'll be back next week. In the interim, buy a copy of Team Topologies, use the link in the show notes, and catch up on your reading. In the next software process and measurement cast number 757, sounds like an airplane, we will begin an arc on critical thinking. The interview in this week's podcast has caused me to begin to explore critical thinking and why the idea is important for Agile coaches. We'll also have a visit from Susan Parente and her Not a Scrumdimentalist column. If process improvement is a never-ending journey, why do so many people ask, are we there yet?